The Real Notebook. I watched The Notebook this weekend for the first time. I have seen it in bits and pieces over the years, but this was the first time I saw the whole thing. In the film, Allie has a first love with Noah. There is a passion between them, but things don't quite work out in part because they are from two different worlds. They are young and life intervenes. Her mother doesn't approve of Noah and undermines their relationship. I am Lon. My fiancée went to see her first love and they succumbed to their mutual desire, only 2 weeks before our wedding. She confessed, we cried together and talked through it, despite being hundreds of miles apart. She was so sorry and said she chose me. She knew I was the better man and the one for her. We went through with the wedding. 35 years later and the situation still hurts and haunts me. Watching the movie, I realized that, like Lon, I was the safe choice, the better husband material, but not the one who stirred her passion. I believe she loves me and even that she knows she chose the better man, but I can't help but feel like I have always been practical. My marriage is on rocky shoals and has been for years. It started with what happened before our marriage and was always there, lurking in the background. At almost 60 I am trying to better understand my life, my marriage, and who I am. It just happened yesterday and she is out of town. I guess what triggered me is the realization that Lon was completely undeserving of that treatment. In a lot of these kinds of movies, the Lon character has some sort of flaw, too self-absorbed, too uptight, or even a cheater behind her back. In this case, Lon was loving and caring, a good man. We have had many conversations, and even attempts at discussing it in marriage counseling, and her inability to explain to me why she went to him is what still eats at me. She still hangs on to I don't know why. All these years later I am not sure she really does know anymore. But I suspect the real answer is something she thinks would hurt me even more. My theories. 1. She went to him in a last-ditch effort to get him to talk her out of marrying me and rekindling their relationship. 2. She did it and told me so I would call off the wedding for her, only I didn't follow the script. She swears neither of these is true but can't supply a plausible alternative. Here is what I am feeling in a nutshell. 1. I do have resentment toward my wife. Resentment that she wants us to drift happily together into that sweet, companionable relationship of our golden years, while I feel like I was robbed of all the stages of the relationship that would make such a period satisfying. 2. I am angry at my 23-year-old self for not having greater self-efficacy, but I also can see exactly why I reacted the way I did. First, I had just started my first job and was some 350 miles away. She had my car, another minor injury to insult. This was possible only because she had my car to drive to see him. I had no close friends nearby and no one to turn to for help in sorting out what was happening. This was pre-internet and when long-distance calls were a luxury. I fear that if I confided in friends and family what happened and we did go ahead with the wedding, it would forever poison her relationship with them. I also felt strangely embarrassed by the whole thing. Who would want to admit that their fiancé would do such a thing only weeks before their wedding? I mistakenly thought it said something about me and my worth rather than about her character. She drove to see me the day it happened and cried and apologized profusely, saying she knew she wanted only me. I caved. In looking back at old letters from that time, I see that I was trying to convince her that I was worthy rather than expecting her to show me she was worthy. 3. There are other significant contributors to my resentment and frustration. Watching the movie just threw me back into those days and how Lon didn't deserve what he got. My post was a reaction to that rush of feelings. 4. After 35 years, 36 next month, lives become entangled in ways that are hard to separate. Financially, it would be a significant hit to both of us. Splitting assets at this point would mean a major scale back of retirement lifestyle for us both. Family relationships would be challenging, especially with our first grandchild on the scene. I have had the talk with her, many times, just us, with a counselor, in letters. As I posted earlier, what gnaws at me is that she still can't tell me why she went to him. She can't or won't say what her intent was, so I have had to come up with my own theories. In looking back, I can say that I put more into the relationship than I received. I have always been the giver. I don't really need her for anything. I am self-sufficient. She, on the other hand, needs me in order to make her life work. I am both a personal and professional mentor to her. If we were to divorce, I would be fine. She, however, would have her world turned upside down. I admitted that I am angry at myself. Yet, I also believed, or wanted to believe, her when she swore how much she realized I was the guy. I now see that she was incapable of living up to what she told me. I misread the situation then. You can say that I shouldn't have been so gullible, duh. But that doesn't mean I wasn't robbed. It means I was naive, trusting, and lacking in self-worth. Do I have no right to feelings of regret? My attempts to resolve my feelings are invalid. And what, in your estimation, would it mean for me to live up to that? Just because watching a movie yesterday triggered some unresolved feelings doesn't mean I have absolved myself of all responsibility. I didn't ask anyone on this forum for advice. I merely asked if anyone else shared similar feelings to my own. I am a decent guy. I have stood by her through challenges that many would have run away from. I have been a responsible father and husband. I have been a good and stable provider. I have never demanded anything from her that I, myself, would not be willing to give. Do I have regret? Unfortunately, yes. The regret, once pushed back into the deep recesses of my mind, has come to the fore in recent years. There are a lot of contributing factors. I know I made the choices, actually, that led to my current feelings of regret, and I don't feel or act like a victim. Now, facing the last quarter or so of life, I am reflecting on the past a bit more, and a movie I saw triggered an emotional response related to an eerily similar circumstance that personally experienced nearly 36 years ago. The situation before the wedding was the tip-off of a longer shared life that has had lots of twists and turns. For so long I really wanted my wife to treat me like the love of her life, but that didn't happen. There are lots of reasons for that, some contributed by me to be sure. Now, after all these years, she does seem to have come around to seeing and appreciating what I think she had all along. The difference is that I have also spent the last several years examining my life and trying to understand who she really was. Through that lens, I struggle with the feeling of too little, too late. I know I am not powerless, as some suggest I may consider myself. Rather, I know I have all the power, and I struggle with whether the upheaval I could create would be worse than staying the course. I have been in and out of individual counseling for the past 9 years and have also been in marriage counseling. Unfortunately, despite the counseling, I have not found peace with this issue. There is a lot between that scenario and where we are today that has occurred and that I haven't shared to get me to this point. We have had a separation of sorts since 2012. I took a job 150 miles from her. She decided to stay there in part to help our younger daughter finish school. Then I realized I enjoyed my own space and time and didn't necessarily want her to move to be with me. With the pandemic, we have spent the most time together since 2012, and I think it has heightened some of my doubts and reservations about a future together. Here is an overview of our history together, admittedly from my perspective. I am sorry this is so long, but it is about as brief as I can make it and still give important context for the situation. We were married 36 years ago in September and have 2 daughters, 31 and 22. We met in college but didn't start a romantic relationship until her senior year. She's a year ahead of me. We dated for a little more than a year and got married the fall after I graduated from college. A couple of months before our wedding, I started my new job in grad school. I was living about 350 miles away from her. We kept in touch via phone and letters, and she came to visit me one weekend. About 2 weeks before our wedding, she slept with her first love, BF-1. She came up to see me that night and confessed, telling me she knew it was a huge mistake, and she apologized profusely, asking me to forgive her. I got angry, we cried, we talked. She spent the weekend and afterwards sent me 2 letters of contrition, pledging her undying love for me. Looking back, I was so young and unsure of what to do. I was also removed from any support from family and friends and felt like I had no one to turn to. I felt like I couldn't turn to my parents or close friends because if she and I were to stay together, it would ruin their opinions and their future relationships with my wife. I had no older siblings to give me advice. And, frankly, in addition to being hurt, I was embarrassed to admit that the woman I loved so much, the one who was supposed to be so in love with me, and the one I was planning to spend the rest of my life with, could sleep with someone else, especially so close to our wedding. Because the wedding was at hand, invitations sent, everything booked, etc., I feared making a rash decision. I was afraid of looking immature and irresponsible if I called it off so close to the date. She seemed so honestly sorry, and I loved her so much that I thought we could still make it work. I forgave her, we agreed to put it behind us, and went ahead with the wedding. I honestly thought I could put it behind me, but I really never did. To this day, she can't tell me why she went to him. Over the past few years, I have asked why several times, and all she can say was that she had been so crazy about this guy that she hadn't been thinking rationally. Looking back, it's easy to see she wasn't really ready to get married, though she pushed for us to move up the wedding date when I got a job out of state. I think she went to this guy to either give him a chance to take her away from me, or she wanted to call off the wedding and didn't have the guts, so she did what she did, thinking I would call it off for her. Those are the only plausible explanations I can think of after all this time. Of course, in hindsight, I see how we never really addressed it. It just got swept under the rug, and it has always gnawed at me. I asked her why she wanted to go ahead with the wedding when she was clearly conflicted. About all I can get from her is that she was afraid she'd lose me if we didn't get married then. Soon into our marriage, she was struggling with her life and career. Her mother had recently been diagnosed with lung cancer, and the prognosis wasn't good. I think she resented being so far away from her family during this time. She expressed a lot of frustrations and seemed out of sorts a lot of the time. I remember feeling like she lacked any confidence in herself, and I was constantly expressing my love and support for her. I tried to be supportive and let her know that I was on her side as she wrestled with these feelings. She described it as restlessness. I now believe the restlessness was simply the same doubts and fears she had before the wedding. I also had reasons to believe she was in contact with another old boyfriend, BF number 2. About 18 months later, she became pregnant. It was ectopic and she almost bled to X in the emergency room. Following her recovery from the surgery, she abruptly quit her job, without consulting me, and decided she wanted to go back to school full-time in the fall. That summer she took off for about 3 weeks to work at the summer camp where she and BF number 2 had first met and fell in love. I always suspected she saw him then, but never knew for sure. I supported her in pursuing her education and we found a way to make it work financially. In the years that followed there were a few signs of continued contact with BF number 2, occasional cards and letters, but it didn't appear they were more than friends. I later discovered that they had maintained intermittent contact via phone calls. During that period, we worked through a number of life challenges, finishing graduate school, starting careers, the death of my wife's mother, the birth of our dear older daughter, the purchase of our first house, and the loss of another pregnancy. I always felt like my wife and I had moments of great alignment during this period, but that something was always just a bit off between us. She never seemed completely happy with me or with our life together. When our older daughter was 3 or 4, my wife went to a week-long reunion for the same summer camp and I suspected she met up with BF number 2, though I could never prove it. I didn't know for sure until I learned through their more recent correspondence that they had spent time together that week. Again, there appeared to be no bonding, but in later correspondence they both acknowledged the passion and attraction they felt for one another. Life continued and in the ensuing years we experienced another lost pregnancy, a traumatic surgery that left my wife sterile, a medical lawsuit, which we settled, several infertilization attempts, individual counseling for her and marriage counseling for us, career transition, and the adoption of our dear younger daughter. I loved my wife but continued to feel like there was a distance between us that we would never be able to bridge. Before the adoption I seriously considered leaving my wife but couldn't bring myself to do it. I distinctly remember thinking that the best thing I could do for her would be to die and leave her with my life insurance and our other assets. In the late 90s, right after the adoption of our younger daughter, we moved to a new location that would be much closer to all of our family. It seemed that we were getting a fresh start in a new home. Within a few years my wife showed a lot of signs of anger and irritability toward me and even toward our girls. In 2004 she started on Prozac to help with what her MD described as premenopause issues. By 2005 I was working a lot of hours, traveling a lot, and nearly always tired when I was home. Admittedly, I was withdrawing more from her and our children. I was not the husband and father I should have been during this period, but I rationalized it because I was making strides in my career and trying to strengthen our financial future. I knew she wasn't really happy, but I resigned myself to an existence where I expected her to be unhappy with me a lot of the time. See the aforementioned comment about life insurance. I would continue to make some effort but gave up on finding a way for her to be happy. Our relationship was seemingly always teetering on the edge of tension. We still liked and had love for each other, but it felt like the spark, the special feeling was gone and that it would never return. On July 26, 2011, I came home to find our office computer open to her email account. I had not ever snooped but felt the need to do so. I soon discovered that she had been engaged in a long-term IA with BF number 2 after he had searched and found her on the internet in 2005. They had mainly exchanged emails, but also had several phone calls and later Facebook chats. In addition, they had met in person once in July 2006, but had not slept with one another, verified by their emails. I also confirmed that they had maintained significant contact throughout our early marriage and that they had spent time together at the camp reunion in 1993 or 1994. Again, they had been physically close at those times, each describing the passion they felt for one another, but hadn't had intercourse, according to their emails. My wife said she decided to cut ties with him sometime soon after the camp reunion based on a phone conversation they had. It appears that they had not been in contact for more than a decade before November 2005. After discovering the emotional affair, I got into her other email accounts, including the secret account she created to correspond with BF number 2, and saw that even before her contact with BF number 2 she was exchanging fond remembrance emails with BF number 1. With BF number 2 they took on a more overt romantic and dirty overtone, though that seemed to become less intense in the last 3 years. Yet, the email exchange that tipped me off was about 6 months earlier, on February 3rd, in which she said she imagined being with him and that these feelings were distinct to you. They both expressed regret at not having consummated the relationship in their 2006 visit. Here is one of the last messages she sent to him during that exchange. I really just want my promises to disappear, push you know who in a deep lake of really cold water, and walk away. There would be no other concerns, no tomorrows. I think of myself looking up at you and then looking down to you. It would be an intense limbo. I get stuck there. We aren't even of any age, just ourselves. She followed up the next day saying, "It is interesting to me that as I seem to feel things more intensely, you seem more resolved. Maybe such timing is a gift of fate to keep us out of trouble." They exchanged more emails, some Facebook chats, and appeared to have a couple of phone calls in late March and early April, including the evening of my birthday if Facebook's timestamps are to be trusted. From what I could tell, their last email and phone contact was in April 2011, though she did send him a text in early May without a response from him. She can't or won't tell me why things seemed to stop after that point, even though I have asked several times. Following my discovery, we worked toward reconciling in our relationship and rebuilding our marriage. Things between us were demonstrably better for a time. We spent more time together, just the two of us, and we both said we felt more connected. We talked about the emotional affair and about our relationship. But when I tried to discuss some of the more painful aspects of the EA, such as her professions of desire for him and how he has his own parts of her heart, she either doesn't respond or tries to deflect. There was no contact with the other man as far as I could tell, since early 2011. He died in a tragic accident in 2012. Also, in 2012 I took a new position some 150 miles where we lived. My current job situation had become intolerable and I actually had 3 opportunities to consider, including 2 that would be farther away. She encouraged me to take the one closer to our home because it could also lead to her moving back to her family farm. When things blew up with her siblings, she decided to stay put and we began a commuter marriage. Since then, I have been promoted to an even bigger role. I have also tried many ways to engage her in the conversations needed to help us move forward. We have had one-on-one talks. We have tried marriage counseling. I have written her heartfelt and direct letters. Nothing seems to have broken through to her. I have my own issues, but she has struggled with anger issues and depression. More recently, our older daughter suggested her mom might have a personality disorder. This is coming from a person who did undergraduate and graduate work in neuroscience and psychology and who is now a physician. So, I think that contributes to our situation. I don't know what the future holds, but I struggle with my responsibility to my vows and whether I should just suck it up and ride it out. A year later, about 3 weeks ago, I told my wife I wanted to take a break for the summer. We are having been living mostly separate lives over the past 9 years, with me working about 150 miles away. Long backstory about that and other things, but I felt like I needed more space and time to think through whether I can go on in this marriage that is coming up on 37 years. We are both 60. Both our children are grown, but one just finished school and is living at home right now. Finances are the only thing really holding me back from filing. We both work, but I currently make about 4 times what she makes. This has not been the case throughout our entire marriage. Early on we made about the same, but she sat out after our younger daughter was born, and when she returned to the workforce about 19 years ago, she was making about half of what I made. We have a little over $3 million in assets, about 90% of them in retirement accounts, plus a house that would net about $300 if sold today. We have about 6 years left on the mortgage. She has about 1 in her retirement accounts, I have about 1.5, and we jointly have about $350 in other savings and investments, not including the house. Splitting assets this close to retirement will be expensive for both of us, but we will each end up with plenty of money for retirement, assuming she can tighten her belt a bit. For those who divorced later in life, how did you determine the financial arrangements? I have yet to see an attorney, but have been thinking about the following scenario. 1. We each keep our individual retirement accounts. 2. She gets the joint assets. 3. She gets the house. I will continue to pay the mortgage, including taxes and insurance, as long as she lives there. Once the mortgage is paid, she gets the house and takes on the taxes and insurance. If she decides to sell the house, she keeps the proceeds. 4. I will pay her a monthly amount as long as I continue to work or until she reaches full retirement age of 67. She will be 61 next month, whichever is earlier. I am thinking of something like $3,000 a month, which, combined with the mortgage payment, would mean total support of about $5,000 a month, or a total of about $360 over the 6 years, assuming she stays in the house. That total would be equivalent to about 35% of my current take-home pay. She is putting in the maximum into her retirement accounts and her take-home pay is about $24,000 a month. I can afford these amounts and could live quite comfortably on what is left over. Based on current valuations, she would have about 1.5 in assets, including the value of the house, and I would have about 1.5. Do you think this split would be fair? Would it be too generous, not compensating her enough? I don't want to pay alimony past retirement. Is that a reasonable expectation? Should I plan on paying more upfront? I realize that many of my questions are likely better answered by an attorney, but I am trying to get some sense of what to expect. If we can come to an agreement on the financial split, my preference would be to try to work with a shared attorney. I don't think she would contest what I propose, but I may be underestimating how hurt she would be. My best guess is that she will practically shut down and want to get it over with. I think she would agree to sharing an attorney if it would save us both money. She definitely knows it is a real possibility, though she may not realize how close I am to making that decision. I've tried to work things out for a long time. In recent years, we both have gone through individual counseling and we did marriage counseling. I've tried to tell her what I needed from her and tried to sit down with her to make a life plan for the last 20 to 30 years of our life, but it's been impossible to get her to commit to any plan. There's a lot to our history that I have needed to heal from, but she's either unwilling or incapable of even trying to give me what I need. About 4 years ago, I wrote her a series of letters outlining some of my concerns and trying to engage her in a discussion around issues in our relationship. She acknowledged receiving one but never responded. She didn't even acknowledge receiving the others. I actually forced her to read one of the letters that was especially important to me. I got no response of any type, and nothing in her approach to our relationship changed. What else can I conclude from that except she is not even going to try? That I am not worthy of her effort, or that she isn't capable. She has some mental health issues that I fear are only going to get worse. Our older daughter, who has a degree in psychology and behavioral neuroscience and who now is a physician, said a while ago that she thinks her mom has a personality disorder. She's been on antidepressants for close to 20 years. She started on those in part to help her control her anger issues, especially aimed toward me. She also has a strained relationships with our daughters, and both situations are related to her lack of consideration for others and to her emotional volatility, especially with our younger daughter. Our older daughter confided in me that often her mom was very volatile with her, going off on her without much warning or provocation. She says she loves her because she is her mom, but she doesn't really like her mother. Our younger daughter says much the same, particularly now that she and her mom are living together most of the time. Through the course of our relationship, she has never really made an attempt to make me a priority. She is an especially inconsiderate person, and I don't see that getting better. She brings little comfort or care into my life. In fact, what she mainly brings is stress and disruption. This past year my blood pressure spiked due in part to stress from work and in part because we were spending so much more time around each other. Even with medication it was frequently in the highs much of the past winter and spring. In the few weeks since we have started our break, my blood pressure has significantly improved. For long bouts in our marriage, I felt like she just didn't like me. I felt like the best thing I could do for her was to die and leave her with a nice estate and sizable life insurance proceeds. When I discovered an emotional affair, including hundreds of emails and social media exchanges between her and an old boyfriend in 2011, I saw in her own voice the disdain and disrespect she had for me. I have given our situation nearly 10 years to improve since then. It hasn't. In fact, in some ways it has gotten worse. Since our break started, she has written me a couple of emails trying to dissuade me from leaving her. Even those attempts to show how much she loves me reinforce the fact that she views the relationship in terms of what she wants and needs. There's not a single request for me to tell her what I need from her. It's all about why she needs me and hollow words about how much she loves me. I say hollow words because they belie how she has treated me and disrespected me for way too many years. I don't love her in the way that I once did. She wants us to find a way to transition into our golden years towards some sort of companionable, loving relationship. Thinking of being with her for the remainder of my time on this earth is not something I look forward to. I really don't like her as a person anymore. The only reason for me to stay is related to the lifestyle we have built and the aspects of a retirement we will likely be able to enjoy and pass on if we keep our assets combined. There's a lot more to the backstory, and this decision has been a long time in the making. It's not just about the marriage we have had and its problems. It's really more about the way the future looks to me based not only on our past, but also how she is today. Our daughter, the physician, has tried to get her mom to go in for a full neurological workup, but my wife has refused to do so. I have reached the point where even if we confirm she had a disorder, I wouldn't want to stay with her through whatever treatment or decline would follow. I think she actually does love me in her way. It's just that her way hasn't been and doesn't show signs of ever becoming the kind of love that fulfills me and helps me feel like we are in this life together. I really just want to free myself of any of the burden that accompanies what we have been living with all these years. Looking back, I can more clearly see the same patterns that emerged with greater force in our middle and later marriage years. I almost left in the third year as we were both finishing graduate school, and it seemed like she and I saw the world differently in several ways. Fortunately, or unfortunately, we became pregnant with our older daughter that year and her mom died, so it locked us in for the foreseeable future. I think the disrespect is more for herself. Her resentments stem more from an inability to communicate and plan with me like a true partner in the marriage. She treated me more like the scapegoat for things she didn't like about her life, or she put me in a no-win position, either say no to what she wanted and stand my ground, while trying to explain why, or relent against my better judgment and deal with the exact outcome I feared would happen. It's hard to explain, but here's an example. When our older child was about 4 or 5 and before our younger was born, my wife came to me a few weeks before Christmas and asked if we could go to the Rockies for part of the Christmas holiday. Mind you, we lived in the Great Lakes region, so this would be a substantial trip. I tried to explain to her that we hadn't budgeted for such a trip. There was little time to piece one together in a way that we could maybe afford it. This was pre-internet, and, besides, our families were expecting us to be with them over the holidays. At the time, our child was the only grandchild on my side. I suggested that we plan such a trip for next Christmas, and we'd have a whole year to save for it and arrange our plans. All she heard was I said no, again, to something she wanted, and that I never gave her ideas fair consideration. This dynamic played over and over again throughout our marriage, even after we became financially more secure and could do some of the things she wanted to do. I think she posed such things as requests of me because it absolved her of any responsibility for making the decision. If I said no or not now, she could make me out as the bad guy in her mind. I do know she has mental health issues. Not sure mentally ill is the exact term I'd use. She is highly functional in her work as a college professor and seems to engage well in public. She doesn't run around looking unkempt or acting erratically, but I would say her mental state has declined in the past 10 years to a noticeable degree. That has been a weight on my mind in terms of the impact of a divorce on her. For many years I didn't understand what made her think that way or treat me like she did. I just felt like she didn't like me for long bouts of the relationship. And I think I have significant evidence to suggest that she didn't. I focused for a long time on trying to be a better husband. When that didn't seem to change anything, I became rather numb and started counting days until our younger daughter would be on her own, figuring we could part ways then. About 9 to 10 years ago we went through a rather intense set of experiences and I attempted to re-engage in a way that I hadn't for a number of years. She did too, up to a point, and then she sank into an even deeper hole. She went through new rounds of counseling and went through changes in meds. Things improved in some respects for a bit, but they stalled and have not improved much over the past 5 years. We then attempted couples counseling for about a year and a half. That seemed to meander without any real progress, so we stopped it in 2017. In the fall of 2017, after attempting, unsuccessfully, in and out of counseling to engage her in deeper conversations about our relationship and to develop a plan for the remainder of our lives together, I decided I would write out my thoughts and questions. The letters I wrote were an effort to be clearly communicated, less emotional, and less confrontation than things could get when we talked about such things. She never responded. I agree that in the past 10 years I have become less accepting of her behaviors and more judgmental as a result. But isn't that reasonable at some point? If you feel like you have given it a real try, but things haven't changed, isn't it rational to judge the situation? How long would you, or any of us, put up with a spouse with a substance abuse problem who either refused or was incapable of addressing their issues? It is likely you would reach a point where you either need to resign yourself to being forever shackled to the situation, knowing it will likely never get better and could get substantially worse, or you would try to figure out how to move on in a way that minimizes the damage it might cause to your spouse. That is where I am. The questions I have been wrestling with since are: at what point do you say you have done all you can to try to make the relationship work? And how do you balance your needs against your obligation to a spouse who needs you? If I had been focused only on my needs, I would have left this marriage long ago. To be sure, I have contributed to the messy relationship we have. I think the difference is that I have, at least up to this point, been truly willing to change some of my behaviors, for the sake of the marriage. I don't see her being willing to change, and I am pretty certain at this point that she can't change, even if she wanted to. My wife has been very secretive throughout our marriage. At first, I thought it was a sign that she didn't trust me. I later came to see that the secretiveness wasn't because of me. It was because of her. No matter what I did or could do, she would never completely reveal herself to me. As I look back, I see how her lack of openness stunted the development of our relationship. I certainly understand the temptation to determine how to assign the weight of blame, but at some point, that calculation is irrelevant. At some point, the only question is whether we can move on, and, if so, how likely is it that we will be able to do so? Final update. Spoke with an attorney today. She believes my proposed split of assets is very reasonable and likely unacceptable if reviewed by a mediator or judge. She also indicated that I likely wouldn't be required to pay any maintenance since my wife has an income of her own, but that even in the event of a maintenance requirement, the length of time is often limited to 3 years. So, my willingness to pay beyond that would be a bonus for her. The attorney is going to recommend potential mediators if we want to start there before seeking opposing counsel. All in all, fairly reassuring that we could potentially resolve this under the scenario I had imagined, maybe even as the worst case. My comment: lifelong relationship turns into a divorce. It is sad, but shows you how fragile relationships can be and not to take them lightly. You guys believe in marriage now? Comment down below, sub and bell, and let us know what you think down below.